Thank you, Pastor Babette. I am here on behalf of my wonderful colleague, Jeremy Myers, who is home very sick. So normally he would be here to launch our first Vocation Chapel of the season and introduce our speaker today, but I am here instead of him. But we're glad to have you here. These chapel series will be happening throughout the school year. So I will read what Jeremy has asked by way of introduction. Today is our first Vocation Chapel of the academic year. We will have a different member of the Augsburg community sharing a story from their vocational journey every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. Coming up next, we have Erica Otterson, the director of our Step Up program, who will be the next speaker on Tuesday, September 26th. So mark that one down. Same time, same place. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jennifer Bankers-Fulbright, a professor in our biology department. Jennifer is committed and an engaged teacher who loves mentoring students in the classroom and in the lab. If you ever have the privilege of meeting with her in her office, I hear you will find a collection of plush versions of many viruses, sort of like a COVID meets the Beanie Babies theme. So I'm gonna have to check that out. Jeremy must have been privy to that. I'll have to swing by sometime. So please help me welcome Dr. Bankers-Fulbright as she shares her talk, Vocation Favors the Prepared Mind, or How I Got to Augsburg.
I have a phone timer up here just to keep me on time. I like to talk. It's a professional hazard. So welcome. If you ask any scientist how they became a scientist, or any professor how they became a professor, you'll probably hear the vast majority say that they've never thought of doing anything else ever since they can remember. That is not my origin story. I came to this late. When people asked me what I wanted to be when I was little, I gave them a whole list. Singer, dancer, actress, mommy, and because I grew up in the 70s and boys and girls jobs were still listed by category, I asked my mom if I could also check off jobs on the boys' side, and she said, yeah. So also policeman, doctor, and fireman. So that was where I started as a child. Notably excluded from this list was any check mark in the box of scientist, boys' side, or teacher, girls' side. And this was basically how I tried to figure out what to do with my life through most of my childhood. And it wasn't until the end of 9th grade, so I was still in junior high, and we got to pre-register for our classes in high school, 10th grade. And I took a look at those electives that were now open to me. At that time, basically you covered most of your science and math in junior high, and high school opened up. And I looked at those electives and knew what I wanted to be. I knew what my vocation was. So I was really looking forward to bringing home my registration form to have my parents sign it. Because here was when I would announce what I was going to be, what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Theater. Thank you, Darcy. So I giddily gave my registration form to my parents and asked them to sign it. I was so excited, I was vibrating, right? And I handed it to my parents. I'm like, can you please sign that? High school is gonna be amazing. And this has become family lore now. It's brought up every once in a while. The response my parents had was something like, no. So apparently I would be taking math and science all 3 years of high school. This was not my choice. There were many tears. And my parents very logically explained it to me. You're too young to be closing any doors at this point. You need to still explore, and this will keep all the doors open to you until you decide, what you want to do when you go to college. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. And so I had a pretty killer high school schedule. I wouldn't say it was fun. So, the next year in 10th grade, taking the biology class I had been forced to take, I fell in love. Not with a boy, but with the subject. My teacher, Mr. Mitch, gave a talk to our class, different than anything I'd ever heard in a science course. And he talked about some people he knew who were planning to start a family, but they knew they carried the genes for a genetic disease that was fatal and devastatingly so. We were learning about DNA, we were learning about genes, we were learning about inheritance, and all of a sudden, counseling and ethics and making a real difference in people's lives got joined with science, and I'm like, I am in. That day, I made my first decision about my vocation that stuck, and that was I was going to become a genetic counselor. That was my goal, and it stayed that way through applying to college. That was the first time I knew that I was going to do something in science. So 10th grade, late bloomer. From that moment on, I've been fascinated with biology, especially biology related to human health. So, to skip over some formative years, I went to college. I chose a liberal arts college because I was not totally giving up theater. I went to St. Ben's, and during my time there, studying biology, and during my time there, I did a summer research internship after my sophomore year, what we would call here an Augsburg experience. And what I found out is even though I hated doing labs in my science courses, I loved doing research in a real lab. So I quickly changed from deciding to be a genetic counselor where I would counsel people and help them through difficult times in their lives to solving the medical problem in the first place by becoming a researcher in the field. Also, another great professor convinced me to switch from looking at genetics to looking at immunology, the study of the immune system, which again caught my attention because when I was in college, we were in the heights of the AIDS epidemic. Okay. So, look, I'm already on page 2, we're good. So, to be a researcher, I now needed a PhD, more school, but they pay you to go to this school. So during that time, I ended up having to decide between the University of Chicago, in Chicago, and Mayo Graduate School in Rochester, Minnesota. There was one big thing that led me to decide which one to go to. I loved Chicago, but the University of Chicago required me to teach undergraduates to earn some of my stipend, and Mayo didn't. I had absolutely none, zip, nada, interest in teaching. The one thing I knew I would never do with my PhD was teach, right? So, my parents, they're wonderful people. Are you sure? Remember when you didn't want to do science, but it turned out you love it? Maybe you want to try it? And my response, because I am a good child, was, no. So I went to Mayo. And I have a little insert in here. It says, narrator, this decision at 21 years old marks the beginning of Jennifer's avoidance of discovering her vocation. So during graduate school, I got to be a mentor for the first time, and I actually mentored an Augie, not a student, a St. Olaf professor, Ted Johnson. He came on a sabbatical to the lab that I was working in, and I taught him the techniques. And he turned to me, and now that I know, all that he is, he said to me, have you ever considered teaching? You seem to have a real gift for it. And we can all guess what I said. No, not teaching. After I got my PhD, I changed to a different lab, still at Mayo, and started working on allergy and immunology. And my boss in the new lab, Dr. Jerry Gleick, saw me present results and complicated scientific papers and different topics to physicians and to other graduate students and to researchers and said, you have a real gift for taking complicated things and expressing them very clearly. Have you ever considered teaching? No, teaching, ew. Then I began working with undergraduate students. Now, in Rochester, Minnesota, there was no four-year university. That's why there was no teaching requirement. So we had students come in and do summer research. I loved it. I bonded with them. They bonded with me. I still do it to this day. And it was great. And I had no idea it could be so much fun to work with people in this relative age group. And they would say, wow, this is super fun. You'd be an awesome professor. Do you ever think you'll take your research and teach it at college? No. People, no. So, during this time, when I was adamantly avoiding teaching, I began volunteering with the local elementary schools to do public health days, with the Rochester and Minnesota State Science Fairs for middle and high school students. I was asked to lead the course in the immunology graduate school program that medical students and graduate students take. I was leading another program in the another course in the immunology program. I got promoted to an assistant professor of medicine because of the work I was doing at Mayo, and I was giving research talks at regional Minnesota colleges like my alma mater, St. Ben's, St. Olaf, met Ted Johnson again, and I was constantly getting feedback saying, wow, you really seem to have a gift for teaching. Have you ever thought about it? And my response slowly turned from laughter and a denial to, am I? Because looking back at all my volunteer and giving back activities, I realized I'd been seeking out teaching activities. Why did I love working with my summer research college students so much? Why did I get more warm fuzzies, as my high school choir teacher used to call them, from my volunteer activities than my research, which I also love doing? Had I been moving toward teaching all along despite my best efforts to avoid it? Yeah, I think I had been. So soon after this realization, I snuck into an education workshop. I was at a conference presenting my research, and way off in the corner, there was a development workshop for college professors of immunology. I didn't know if I was allowed to go, but I did. You know when you walk in a room, and all of a sudden you're like, my people, right? That was that. That was that moment. And I learned things I'd never learned before. I learned there was a science and an art behind teaching that was not taught to people in grad school, at least not in the sciences. And during the flight home from that meeting, I ended up sitting next to one of the other professors who had been in that section, who taught at a school in Minnesota. And I told him what I was thinking. And he said, as so many had before, you know what? I think you'd be great in the classroom. So at 35,000 feet, I discovered my true vocation, what I consider my true vocation, teaching. Unfortunately, I had put myself in a place where there was no way to do that because I chose Mayo. So it took me another 5 years to figure out who and where I wanted to teach. And the answers to those were I wanted to teach undergraduates and I wanted to be at a liberal arts college. I wanted to teach first and do research second. I was very clear on that. So I needed to develop my college teaching skills. I was able to do a sabbatical replacement at Carleton College where I taught immunology, and I loved it. I took a deep breath and left research at Mayo and worked at the community college in Rochester for a couple years teaching microbiology and genetics and introbiology. I didn't think I would enjoy teaching community college. I loved it. It was teaching that I loved. It really didn't matter where I was doing it, but I wanted to be in a bigger city. So, as I looked in the Chronicle for permanent positions that opened, having no idea this was a competitive thing, none, when a position opened at a school that was a liberal arts school that was in or near a city and that had a clear commitment to students, I applied. But it wasn't until I was interviewed at Augsburg that things really clicked for me. And it wasn't the campus or even the city of Minneapolis that drew me in. By the way, Minneapolis, the city I was born in. It was the students that I met. They were different from the students I'd talked to before, and they asked for what they needed. They told me what they wanted. They weren't passive vessels receiving information. They were actively engaged in their learning. And I left this place saying, this is where I belong. And I hoped Augsburg thought the same thing. They did, and in 2008, I started in the biology department here. 13 years after I earned my PhD, which I was never going to use to teach. So, I'm a little bit over, but I want to finish with what's my advice to help students and anybody find their vocation. I've stolen my advice from what one of my graduate professors told me, Dr. Vanna Lennon. One day she casually asked me what my plans were after I graduated, and I said, I don't know. I have a lot of ideas, but I don't know. And I expected her to chastise me for being so far along in the program and not knowing what I wanted to do, or to give me a list of things I needed to do and check them off. And instead what she did is she looked at me and she said, don't worry. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do. Just keep moving forward toward what you love to do, and eventually you'll find your path. And she was exactly right. I kept moving toward what I loved for 13 years, and I found my vocation here at Augsburg waiting for